Hi, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar. Today's webinar is Aging in Place, and my name is Jane Marie Schaeffer, and I'll be presenting today. During the presentation, if I can just ask you to hold your questions till the end, and you'll have an opportunity to ask questions at the end. The presentation will be about 30 minutes, just so you can plan, and there'll be additional time for questions at the end. All right, so let's begin. So today we're going to talk about aging in place. And first, I'm going to talk a little bit about why this is so important to our seniors and to the rest of us who have to help take care of seniors. And the reason this is important because of the number of people who are going to need long-term care. This is something that we've known for a long time, that the number of people needing long-term care is growing every day as baby boomers turn age 65. The number of individuals over age 65 will double from 2000 to 2030, when there will be about 71 million seniors in America. After you turn age 65, your chance of needing some type of long-term care assistance increases to about 69%. So that means a lot of people are going to need care as they age. And it's not that everyone, has illnesses or issues or diseases. Some of it is just from us living longer. It's not uncommon to have, people in their 90s or 100. We've seen more and more of that lately. But as we live longer, the odds of you needing some types of help are going to increase. And we're going to talk about different ways that you can get that help today. And overall, what this is what we talk about. It's long-term care planning. So long-term care planning is planning for how we will live our lives as we age. And one important question is, do we want to live at home with help, or do we want to move to a facility that will provide help to us? And I think the answer to the second part of the question is no. Most people want to stay home and stay home as they age. And this webinar today will help you learn the different things you need to do to plan so that you can stay in your home as you age. So 87% of adults age 65 and older want to stay in their current home and community as they age. And, if this was a live seminar, I would ask you who wants to go to a nursing home, and predictably no one would raise their hands. But if instead I was to say who wants to stay at home, I would think almost everyone would want to do that. So knowing that is most people's preference, let's talk about some of the planning that we can do to make sure you get to stay at home. So first question is, where do you want to live? So it's more than just at home, it's where in particular should your home be? So is your current home age friendly, right? That's something you hear about a lot. For example, is it more than one level? Is your laundry in the basement? Are you going to have a hard time getting down to the laundry? I mean, I know I live in a home where that's the case. So I know my home really isn't going to be the home that I plan to retire in, because it wouldn't be suitable. It's an older home. It has lots of stairs. That wouldn't be good for myself or my husband. So if your home is not suitable, what are you going to look at? Can you downsize to a home that's smaller, easier to take care of? Or do you not want to be bothered with a home at all, right? Do you want to live in an apartment or some type of senior housing arrangement? A lot of people do that, and I hear how happy they are that they don't have to plow the snow anymore. For example, like yesterday when we had so much snow, not having to worry about plowing and shoveling is something that's really nice, and to not have to worry about that anymore. So kind of knowing where you want to live is one step in your planning process. Another step is who is going to provide care for you. Now, the majority of care is provided unpaid by family members, right? And most likely it's a spouse who is going to provide the most care. After that, who's next? Children are going to provide care. But how many of us really think that our children can provide all the care that we need? I would say not all of us, right? Because children have to work, they have jobs, they have family, so they can help out. But if you do get to a point where you need full-time care, it's more likely that your children are not going to be able to provide that. Now they may be able to help supervise that care or help take over some other jobs such as bill paying, but most likely they're not going to be able to provide that full-time care for you every day. So if you're not looking at family, which is unpaid care, who else is going to provide the care, right? Most likely you're going to have to pay for that. So it could be hiring home health aides through a home health agency, through someone that you know through the community. Costs vary greatly. We'll talk about costs in a little bit of time, but you do have to think about, that option and how are you going to afford to pay for that care. So there's many ways to pay for your care, right? So the first way is privately, right? Through your own income and through your own assets. And that is probably going to be easy to handle if it's only a few hours of care per week. However, as with the family members who may not be there, if you need full-time care, so now if you need to hire that full-time care, that's going to be pretty expensive, right? And how long can your money pay for that type of care at home? So if you are looking at your situation and you say, oh, it doesn't look like I have enough money to pay for care for a long period of time, what are my other options? Some other options are long-term care insurance. That's a product that you can buy to pay for your care. It's not something that everyone has, nor something that everyone can afford. So that is just one aspect of this. It may or may not be right for you. Other resources are looking at government programs to pay for care. So there's, for example, veterans have benefits available to them. Medicaid pays for the majority of long-term care. Medicare pays only for a little bit of the care. And we're going to talk a lot about these different programs today. So part of planning your long-term care is also developing a care plan. And in our firm, we're lucky enough to have a care manager who works for us, and her name is Kim Hance. She's a trained social worker. So the care plan goes just beyond the legal and the financial planning, right? It also goes into what other resources are available in the community, putting together all the different pieces. Some programs that you may not even know are available to you. Meeting with someone like a Kim can help you put together a care plan so you can get all the other pieces in place besides just the medical care that you need. So it could be, providing meals, getting bill paying, respite care. That's a wonderful one. Respite care is to give your caregiver a break. We see that a lot with spouses because they are there all the time and they're the primary caregivers, that they get burnt out from doing the caregiving and they need a break. They need to get away, maybe for a vacation, or maybe they just need to make sure they can get out for a few hours alone every week. And there are programs in the community that provide the respite care. One I'd like to highlight is the Alzheimer's program. They have a grant from New York State to provide respite care to individuals who are taking care of Alzheimer's patients. So it's free, right? It's available to you. It's something that you should take advantage of if you are in the position of being the caregiver. It's really going to help you out. So in terms of developing a care plan, the other thing that our care manager does is when she meets with the family is to really kind of write down and see what types of activities you need help with. And the reason this is going to be important is because to qualify for some of these programs, you have to demonstrate what activities you need assistance with. So there's activities of daily living, and then there's instrumental activities of daily living. The activities of daily living are your more basic care needs, personal hygiene, dressing, continence, and The instrumental activities of daily living are more ancillary things, such as doing grocery shopping, getting transportation to medical appointments, cleaning the house. So the instrumental activities of daily living, even though they're important and you do need help with those, are not necessarily going to qualify you for some of the programs we're talking about today. The activities of daily living are important. And to qualify for, long-term care insurance, the Medicaid program, for example, you need to have assistance with 2 out of 6 activities of daily living, or you have a cognitive impairment. So it's important to have social work or medical professional assess you so you know, are you at the point where you would qualify for a program like this? To get into an assisted living facility or a nursing home, there's further requirements that you have to meet medically. So it's good to know where you are on that, range, and, when would you qualify, or when could you expect to qualify for these programs? This is just a list of some of the community-based services. They're kind of here for reference. If you wanted more information, you could contact myself or Kim, but there's a lot of things available that are, free or low cost in the community that help you out. As we said before, the home delivered meals, that's really important. Getting nutritional counseling. Umbrella is a program through the Colony Senior Service Center that helps you find qualified people to make repairs to your home. That's another important part of staying at home. Transportation, for example, that becomes really important when you may not be able to drive anymore. So what resources do you have for free transportation? For example, when you qualify for Medicaid, you become eligible for transportation to and from doctor's appointments. So, those are some of the things that are in the community that could be free or low cost. Well, let's look at what it would cost if you have to pay for your care. Right? So if you have to pay for your care, I mentioned the unpaid home health care before, but if you have to pay for a home health aide through an agency, the cost is going to be about $30 per hour. Of course, it's going to vary depending on the number of hours you need, which is why I said it's probably affordable for 3 or 4 hours a week. However, if you need full-time care, 8 hours a day around the clock, every day of the week, that's going to be thousands every month, right? So that's expensive. Now, when you go through a home health aid agency, the cost is a little bit higher than if you hire someone yourself. However, if you're hiring someone yourself, you should know that even though the cost is cheaper, there's risks if you're hiring them off the books by not paying payroll taxes or not paying workers' compensation. So you have to think about what are those risks and do they offset the benefit of a lower wage that you're paying. If you want to hire someone off the books, but you don't want to do all that paperwork yourself for taxes and such, there are payroll companies that you can use to make sure that those taxes are getting paid. So that's kind of at home, right? The next level up would be an assisted living facility, which is definitely nicer than a nursing home. It's still not as comfortable as home, but it's really in between. And I find a lot of people can be pretty comfortable there for a long time. However, you have to think about the cost, right? Assisted living does not come cheap. The cost can range from about $3,000 per month up to $8,000 per month. And it depends on the level of assistance that you need. Part of the cost is for the place that you're staying. Some are nicer than others, but also some of the cost is for how much, care do you need? How much do you need assistance with? There's also memory care facilities. And these are assisted living facilities for individuals with dementia or other type of cognitive impairments. And they're more expensive. They average around $10,000 per month. And they're more expensive because of there's more supervision required for these individuals. So with the assisted living costs being what they are, it's not something that everyone can afford. So that may not be an option, to you. And when we talk about Medicaid, you'll see that Medicaid doesn't really pay for much assisted living care. It does pay for other programs. Now, a nursing home, that's the most expensive program of all. Nursing homes are going to average about $15,000 to $16,000 per month. They're running about $550 per day. That's more than any of us would probably spend on a hotel. Or if you spent that on a hotel, you'd get much better food and surroundings than you do in a nursing home. Not to make light of all the medical care that you're receiving there, but that's a lot of money to spend. And I don't think many people could afford to pay that for a very long period of time. An average stay in a nursing home is about 2 years. Of course, people are longer, right? There's people who are sometimes in a nursing home for several years. Just in my experience, individuals who have Alzheimer's disease, if they don't have any other major physical impairments, they can live quite a long time. So that could be a very expensive nursing home stay. All right, so what are your funding sources to pay for this? We kind of talked about this. I'll go into a little more detail about some of these. There's private pay, there's Medicare, Medicaid, long-term care insurance. I mentioned that not a lot of people have it. Part of the reason is, you don't want to buy it when you're young, right? Because then you'll be paying the premiums for a long time. But if you wait until you're 65 or 70 to buy long-term care insurance, you may not be eligible for it, right? You may have developed some health condition that either makes you not eligible for it, or it makes the premiums very expensive. So long-term care insurance has its pluses and minuses. If you have long-term care insurance from a long time ago, you'll know that over the past several years, you've been getting notices that the rates are increasing. So that's another problem, is that if you have it and suddenly the rates increase, you may not be able to afford to keep it. The respite grants, that's what I mentioned with the specific program with the Alzheimer's. That's the New York State program for respite care. The veterans programs, I'll talk about a little bit. So for the veterans programs, there's a program called the Aid and Attendance Program. And to qualify for that, either you or your spouse have to be a veteran, and you have a need for long-term care. There's, asset requirements. Your assets have to be below a certain level. But if you qualify for that Aid and Attendance Program, you receive a stipend every month. And then you can use that stipend to pay for either care at home or an assisted living facility. And it can be around $1,500, $1,600 per month for the veteran. It can be about $1,200 a month for the spouse of a veteran. So if you are a veteran, that's probably a program that you would want to look into further to see if you qualify for that. So Medicare, I'll talk about Medicare for a little bit, because a lot of people think that Medicare will pay for all of their long-term care costs, and it doesn't. It's really a limited benefit for this purpose. So Medicare, as you know, that's your health insurance that you receive after you turn age 65. So because it's primarily a health insurance program, what Medicare pays for following a hospital stay, they'll pay for a rehab stay in a nursing home. So they'll pay for a short-term stay of up to 100 days. So for the first 20 days, Medicare will pay 100%. For the next 80 days, you will have a copay of $200 per day. If you have a Medicare supplement plan, they often cover the copay for you. But after 100 days, if you still need to stay in the nursing home because you can't go home safely, Medicare will no longer pay for you. At that point, you would have to be switched to private pay or to Medicaid. So maybe because people hear that Medicare does pay for some nursing home care, that they think it's going to cover other long-term care costs, but it doesn't. So that is something, to be aware of that it's really a limited benefit. And if you're looking at ongoing care, sometimes it's called custodial care at home, or if you need to continue to stay in a nursing home. For example, Medicare is not going to pay for that. Medicaid is the program that is going to pay for that. So what is Medicaid? So Medicaid is different than Medicare, right? Not everyone is automatically eligible for it. To qualify for Medicaid, you need to be over 65 or disabled, and you need to meet financial eligibility requirements. So what does Medicaid pay for? You know, today we're focusing on aging in place, so we're going to talk about Community Medicaid, but Medicaid, of course, also covers nursing homes. They're the primary payer for nursing home care. Community Medicaid, this is a program that not everyone is aware of, but it's a very good benefit in New York. Community Medicaid pays for home care, adult daycare, and some assisted living facilities. So if you qualify for Community Medicaid, you can stay in your home. You can have care at home. You know, there's some programs, you know, you may get 40 hours a week of care at home. Some other programs where you could get up to 24 hours of care, depending on what kind of help that you need. So it is possible to stay home with Medicaid coverage, and that can keep you at home for quite a long time. You can use home care in conjunction with an adult daycare. So if you're someone who enjoys socializing and being around other people, there are programs that you can go to during the daytime. They're covered by Medicaid. And then at night or on weekends, Medicaid would provide home health aides to take care of you at home. The assisted living, I would say the majority of assisted living facilities only take private pay. There are, however, a handful of assisted living facilities that take Medicaid. So sometimes that works as an option for someone who can't really stay home anymore, but they can't afford assisted living. Some of the Medicaid assisted living facilities may work for you in that case. So these are the financial eligibility requirements for Community Medicaid. So there's two tests. There's an income test and an asset test. So if you're single and you're applying, you would just look at the individual column there. Now your income level has to be $1,677 a month, right? If you're over $1,677 per month, however, you can still qualify for Medicaid, but you'll have something that's called a spend down, and we'll talk a little bit about that. Now that number went up quite a bit, almost double from last year. Last year was about $900. It was $954 per month. So that meant that individuals, you know, who qualified for Community Medicaid had a much larger spend down. A lot of people were maybe just in that, you know, $1,000 to $1,500 range in terms of monthly income, and by raising it to the $1,600 level, that's going to eliminate a spend down requirement for many people. So it's going to make it easier for a lot of people with income in that range to qualify. Now, if you're over that $1,600 per month level, you can still qualify, as I said, with a spend down. So income, what does income consist of? So income consists of your Social Security payments every month, your pension payments, distributions from an IRA or 401k plan, any other income you may have, interest or dividends that you earn on investments, you know, a rental, if you have a rental property, that all counts as income. And Medicaid looks at gross income, right, before any deductions or before any taxes are paid. So they're going to look at what's the gross amount that you're receiving from all these different sources. Assets, now they also look at your assets. So assets are going to be everything, all the assets you have, your financial assets. So it's going to be your bank accounts, your investment accounts, your home and your car, but there are exemptions I'll talk about. And the asset level is $30,182 total. And you have to be under that amount when you to be able to apply for community Medicaid. Now, this is another drastic jump in the amount of assets that you can have. It almost more than doubled. It was about $16,000 last year, and now it's over $30,000. So again, this is going to make it easier for people to qualify, right? You may have assets that are exempt. So the non-exempt assets, now you can keep almost double, right? And the non-exempt assets, the $30,000, if you have 30,000 or less, you can keep that in your checking account and you can use that to pay your living expenses while you're also at the same time qualifying for community Medicaid. So if you're married and you apply for Medicaid, Medicaid looks at both of your income and assets. They want to see what your spouse's income and assets are. So if you, on the income side, it's not as bad because there's a spousal allowance that your spouse is allowed to keep. And in most community Medicaid cases, they're not going to count your spouse's income. They're just going to look at your income. Same thing on terms of the assets. Your spouse is allowed to have about $74,000 of assets in their name. So that 74 in addition to your 30 means that if you're married, you could have about $100,000 in different bank accounts and still qualify for community Medicaid. So that's pretty generous. It's quite a lot of money that you can have and still get Medicaid to pay for care in your home. Now, if your spouse has more than $74,000, or if they have a very high income, there's a type of application you can do where you do a spousal refusal. And that's an application where you say, the spouse, I should say, says, I need my income and my assets to live on. So I'm not going to contribute the excess to my spouse's care. And what that does is that gets the individual on Medicaid, even though their spouse may have more income and more assets. So what are the exempt assets? Okay. So the exempt assets, it's this list here, and some of them are pretty substantial. Some of them are not. Some of the smaller ones are a burial plot, a prepaid burial contract. That's something I always tell clients to do, is to go ahead and prepay your funeral because that amount is exempt for Medicaid. Only a very small life insurance policy is exempt. For example, a policy up to $1,500. Any larger or most other life insurance policies, if it's a term insurance policy, it's exempt. If it's a whole life or a universal policy, what does that mean? That means that you have cash value in the life insurance. That cash value counts as one of your resources. So that has to be added up just like the money in the bank. So if you do have a policy that's built up a large cash value, we're going to want to do something to protect that. And you're allowed to have a car. A car is an exempt asset. So going back, really the two largest assets, in my opinion, that most people have, it's your house and your retirement account, right? And they're both exempt when you apply for Medicaid. Your house is exempt when you're applying for community Medicaid, or even for a nursing home, as long as if you're married, if you have a spouse still living there at home, right? So community Medicaid, you're living there, so it's exempt. If you had to go into a nursing home, if your spouse is still living at home, the house is exempt, okay? So that's, a large asset kind of off the table there. However, we don't want to lose sight of the fact that if you had to move out and move into a nursing home and you didn't have a spouse living at home anymore, then your house is no longer exempt, right? Then Medicaid can put a lien against your house. So that all that means is we want to find a way to try and protect your house to guard against that future nursing home placement. Now, retirement accounts, this is a very generous exemption that New York State gives individuals applying for Medicaid. Any amount that's in your IRA or your 401k plan is exempt. So you could have $500,000 in a 401k plan, and still qualify for Medicaid. It's just a special law they have that does exempt those assets. So if you had $500,000 in an IRA, Medicaid can't touch that on your death, right? That still goes to your beneficiaries. However, if there's a drawback to it, the drawback is that they still count the income that you take from that IRA as income that has to be spent down. So you're probably familiar with the requirement that when you reach age 72, you have to start taking required minimum distributions from your IRA. So on a $500,000 IRA, that may mean you have to take $40,000 of income when you're 72, right? So that income, that's part of your, counts as part of your income towards the limit. And it means that you would probably have to have a spend down to qualify for Medicaid. But the balance that's left in that IRA account, that, you know, if you have 500,000 and let's say you're spending a little bit every year, but there's still $300,000 in that account when you pass away, that still goes to your beneficiaries. So that remains a protected asset. So that's the benefit of IRA accounts. So how do you become financially eligible for Medicaid, right? Well, if your income or your assets are too high. So in terms of assets, if your assets are too high, if they're above the limits, that $30,000 limit, you can transfer assets out of your name to qualify for Medicaid. And there's really two ways you can do that. You can do an exempt transfer of assets, or you can transfer assets to a trust. In terms of income, if you have too much excess income, you can transfer that excess income to something called a pooled supplemental needs trust and still qualify for Medicaid. So there are options out there. So let's talk a little bit about the trust. Okay. So to transfer assets to a trust, it has to be a revocable trust. It can't be an irrevocable. I'm sorry, I said it backwards, right? It has to be an irrevocable trust. It can't be a revocable trust. And why is that? Because a revocable trust means that you're the trustee, you're in charge, you could take the money out. So that kind of a trust doesn't really give you any protection. However, an irrevocable trust, you know, the trust document says that you're not the trustee, you can't take money out of the trust. So because it has those restrictions on your control over the trust, that means that the trust is a protected asset when you apply for Medicaid. So if you put, you know, your investment account in a trust and your house in a trust, and you only have, you know, $100,000 in the bank between you and your spouse, either one of you could apply for Community Medicaid. So that's the real benefit of having an irrevocable trust. So irrevocable trusts, they're not as bad as they sound. You know, irrevocable sounds like you're giving up full control over the trust, right? But there are certain rules that govern these trusts. And as you can see, you do have certain rights that you retain in the irrevocable trust that make it not as bad as it sounds. So number one is that you have to name a child or some other person to be the trustee, right? The trustee cannot be you or your spouse. However, the way you have control over that is that you can fire the trustee and replace the trustee with another trustee of your choice. So if you put in, you know, if I put in my oldest son and suddenly he wasn't doing what I wanted to as trustee, I have another child, so I could fire him and put my other son in as a trustee. So that's how you keep some control over the management of the trust. I mentioned that you can put your house in the trust. Most people, I would say the majority of our trusts are for individuals looking to protect their house. Why? Because that's usually your largest asset that you want to protect and pass down to your children. If you put your house in the trust, you know, people are worried. They're like, well, what's going to happen? Are my kids going to kick me out? Right? They can't. Written in the trust document, it says that you have the right to live in your house for the rest of your lifetime. So you have that protection in the trust. Even though the trust may own your house, you are going to keep the right to live there. You also you keep the obligation to pay the bills, the taxes, insurance, etc. on the house. So honestly, there's not much change to you day to day because you're still living there, you're still paying the bills. Just by putting the house in a trust, really just by doing some paperwork and a deed to transfer title to the trust, you've now protected your house. If you have money that you need to put into the trust, right? If you have more than that allowed limit you're allowed to have, you can put the excess money into the trust. Now, the trust will say that you can't remove that money, but it will say that you can keep receiving income that's earned by that money. So if you have interest, I mean, interest isn't usually a lot these days, although it's getting a little bit better with CDs. Dividends, if you have stocks in there and you're getting dividends, you can continue to receive that interest or those dividends from the trust. Now, what if that's not enough, right? What if you put your money in the trust, you qualify for Medicaid, and now you have suddenly a big expense that you need to pay for, like a repair to the house? You can do something called a partial revocation of the trust. And a partial revocation is an agreement between you and the beneficiaries. Now, who are the beneficiaries, right? The beneficiaries are usually your children. You all agree to do a partial revocation that allows you to take some money back out of the trust. So you could take out that $20,000 and pay for a new roof. So there is a way to get to the principal if you need it. Another control that you keep in these irrevocable trusts is that you get to choose the beneficiaries. So a trust acts like your will. It's going to say who gets the assets left in the trust on your death. So you name those beneficiaries when you create the trust. If you change your mind later on, you can change the trust to change who the beneficiaries are. Just like if you have a will that names certain beneficiaries, you can always change that later on by doing a new will. So there's a lot of good aspects to the trust. It protects assets, but it does also let you do all these different things, changing trustees, changing beneficiaries, living in your home. So that's what makes it a really good tool to protect your assets, qualify for Medicaid, and still keep use of your house while you're alive. So what do you fund your irrevocable trust with? Well, we've talked about your home, right? We've talked about maybe some stocks or investments that you want to put in the trust and you can still receive the dividends or interest. Another item on here is life insurance with cash value. If you remember, I said if you have a type of life insurance policy that has a cash value, Medicaid is going to count that cash value as your asset. So in order to make that not happen, you need to transfer ownership of the life insurance policy to the trust. Once you do that, now that cash value is protected. It doesn't have to be spent down. So what assets are you going to keep out of a trust? Yeah, you're going to keep out your checking so you can pay your bills every day. You're going to keep out, maybe additional savings or CDs so that you feel comfortable that you have enough money to pay for things, right? It's going to really depend on each situation, how much you want to protect and how much you want to keep out in your own name. So, okay, trust sounds good, right? But is anyone thinking, well, what's the 5-year look-back period, right? So there's a 5-year look-back period that applies to applications for Medicaid for a nursing home. So when you apply for a nursing home, if you created a trust within the past 5 years, you're not going to be eligible for Medicaid. In other words, you have to do the planning 5 years before you need the care, right? So if you put everything into the trust and then you don't need, care for 10 years, right? And then you need to go into a nursing home, well, you're good because you've gotten past that 5-year period. So everything's going to be protected. Now with Community Medicaid, there's good news and bad news, okay? So the good news is that there is currently no look-back period for Community Medicaid. So no look-back period means if my mother needed help, right, and she needed help at home, we could set up a trust now in March, right? And because there's no look back period, we could apply in April or May to get her care at home. So there's no long waiting period. We can do it very quickly. So that's the good news. The bad news is that law is changing. Back in October of 2020, a law was passed to have a 30-month look back period. That's a 2.5-year look back period for community Medicaid applications. Now, that happened during the COVID emergency, so that has not been put into effect yet, but it may be put into effect later in this year. So the change hasn't gone away, it's just been delayed. So for now, I would take advantage of the no look back period. If you or someone you know is thinking about applying for community Medicaid, I would apply. You could get eligible right away. You don't have to worry about the look back period. If you don't, it's just like planning for a nursing home. If you do the planning and you put assets into a trust, you can expect there to be a 2.5-year waiting period before you could apply for community Medicaid. So that's something to keep in mind in terms of your overall planning. So how can you avoid the penalty period? Well, of course, other than planning in advance, right? That's one way to avoid it. If you do all this while you're healthy and while you don't need care, that's the best time to do it, right? Because then hopefully—
Hey, welcome back.
Thanks.
everything is set.
Okay, I'm listening to a webinar.
Okay.
So the other things that you can do, right, there's some other exempt transfers that you can do if you don't have 5 years, or you have to do it within that time frame. So one is transfers to spouses, right? So you can do transfers between spouses without any penalty. So you could take the spouse who needs to apply for Medicaid, you could take their assets and put them in the name of their spouse. Remember, their spouse is allowed to have more money. And then that's one way to qualify for Medicaid. There's some exempt transfers for children, right? So there's an exempt transfer if you have a child with a disability. You can transfer those assets to the disabled child with no penalty. If you have a caregiver child is defined as someone who's moved in with their parents and lived there for 2 years to help take care of them. If your child does that, you can transfer your home to the caregiver child as an exempt transfer. So these exempt transfers, there aren't many, but they may apply. So you're going to look at exempt transfers, transfers to spouse. Those are some of the things we can do. We're also going to look at ways to spend down your money. Frankly, Medicaid doesn't care if you spend your money, they only care if you gift it, right? So if you are looking to qualify for Medicaid, you don't have 5 years, right, to put it in a trust. What can we spend your money on? Does your house need repairs? Is there something you've been putting off for a while? Let's spend some of that money now to fix up your house, because that's not going to be deemed a transfer. So lastly, I'm going to talk a little bit about the Medicaid with the income spend down. And then after that, we'll have time for some questions. So switching gears now. So we've talked about assets and how you can qualify for assets, like transferring them out of your name or putting them in a trust. So they're similar, but different rules for income. So for income, if your income is over the Medicaid amount, which is about that $1,600 per month that I mentioned, you have an income spend down, and you can qualify for Medicaid by putting that income spend down into a pooled supplemental needs trust. So this is a different trust than the trust that we're using for your assets. A pooled supplemental needs trust, it's a trust that's established by a nonprofit organization. They set these up for many different individuals who are receiving Medicaid, and they manage all that money for everyone who's on Medicaid. So you put your income spend down into that trust every month, but you don't lose it, right? You don't lose access to it. You only have to go through the trust now, so it's a little bit more bookkeeping, but you can still use the funds in the trust to pay for your living expenses. So you do keep use of those funds. So this is examples of what a pooled trust can pay for. So it can pay for any type of living expenses that you have. You can pay, rent or mortgage, utilities, groceries, all of those bills can be paid out of the pooled trust. For example, let's say you have $3,000 a month of income. The first $1,600 you're going to be able to keep, right? That's the amount you can keep. The second, the $1,400, that goes into the pooled trust every month. If you had $1,000 rent bill, that could be paid out of the pooled trust. So it's really a wonderful way to qualify for Medicaid and keep use of your funds. Now, is there a downside to this? If there is, there's a small downside to this, and that's that any money that's left in that pooled trust stays with the nonprofit on your death. Now, I say it's a small downside because usually you're spending all the money you put into the trust every month, right? So there may be a small balance in there on your death. Most people don't accumulate a large balance in the pooled trust. But whatever that balance is, it stays with the pooled trust. Now, that's different than the other trust we were talking about for your assets, because that trust goes to your beneficiaries on your death. So that can be passed along. The pooled trust, to enroll in that, it's a relatively easy application to do. It's relatively inexpensive. It's about a $200 or $300 application fee. And then they charge you a small monthly fee, $20, $30, something like that. It's a percentage of the income that you contribute every month. So that's how you can qualify with income. So, it's possible to qualify for Community Medicaid really almost based on whatever income and assets you have. You can qualify for Community Medicaid and get this help at home. All right, so we're at the end of the presentation now. So does anyone have any questions? So you can either unmute yourself or you can type it in the chat box, whatever you prefer doing.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome. Thanks.
Thank you.
I see someone has a question.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. Yes.
Okay. Are you offering this at all post this session to review it again and take notes more carefully?
Oh, sure. Yeah, that's a great question. So first of all, everyone who attended today, you'll be emailed a copy of the slides. But we do offer these once a month, or you can go onto our website and there'll be a recorded one on there. Okay. So you can watch the recorded one, you can slow it down, you can take notes. So there's a couple ways you can get access to the information.
Thank you.
You're
That's
welcome.
very, very kind.
Thanks.
Thank you. It was a great webinar.
Yes.
Thank you. Good to hear.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Thanks.
It was good. Thank you.
Thanks. Any other questions? Oh, wait, I see something in the chat there.
Yes, and I have questions. Same person.
Okay. So examples of nonprofits who do the SNTs. Okay.
Yes.
Yeah. So the one that is most popular is NYSARC, MISARC. They're based in Latham. So they're one of the biggest ones in the Albany area. There is a, let's see.
NIS, spell again, please.
Sure, it's NYSARC, NYSARC. Yeah, there's another one that's based out of Rochester, I think it's called, there's Wildwood has one I think that's only limited to students of Wildwood. There's a list of about 20 or so that I could give you, but some are based in New York City, some are out in Rochester, Buffalo. So a lot of people end up using the NYSARC one for here.
And what about Mid-Hudson?
Same thing. They cover that area also.
So how does one add things to the irrevocable trust? For example, if a banking account is in there and you have a bunch more money you want to,
Mhm.
for the trust, how do you do that?
So you can do one of two things. You can either just add that money to the trust that's existing in there, or you could just set up a new trust in the name, a new bank account in the name of the trust. You don't have to set up a new trust, or it could just be a new account in the name of the trust.
Okay, so for a substantial amount of money or a chunk of money, one would perhaps create just an additional new account that lives in the trust.
That's correct. Right.
Thank you. Thank you
You're
very
welcome.
much. Good seminar.
Thank you. Right. Any other questions?
You said you're going to mail us or email us these slides and things so that they'll be available somehow?
Yep, you'll get an email with the slides. And then there's also recordings on our website if you wanted to watch this again.
Excuse me, go ahead.
I think the list of these SNTs might be a useful thing to have. Direct
Sure.
back.
Mhm. I could put that, yes. Just trying to think, I could put that on the website, or I could send that out in an email.
Well, however you can let us know where it's accessible easily.
Sure, I'll figure out the best way to get that to you.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Our
Hmm.
connection was prohibited yesterday by the storm.
Oh, right. That's too
Connection
bad.
is, so we wait for next round.
Yeah, so yesterday was wills versus trust, I believe, right? Yeah. So you would either have to wait till next month, we'll do them next month, or
Okay.
you could go on the website if you're, tech savvy, I guess, is that the word? And you could find it on the website. There's a pre-recorded version there.
Okay. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Okay.
Yes. Mhm. Oh, I thought I heard a question. Okay. All right. Well, if there's no other questions, we'll just end for today. So thanks everyone for attending. Hope you found this useful.
Thank
Yes,
you.
indeed.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Thank you.